Welcome back. A new report finds online threats targeting individual judges, federal and state, well, they've soared over the past year. The Global Project Against Hate and Extremism found violent threats and calls for impeachment against judges rose 327% since last May. CBS News Justice correspondent Scott MacFarlane joins me now to discuss that. Scott, we'll get to that in a moment. It's an important topic, but first, I want to talk to you about important news on the Ashli Babbitt front today, a settlement with the Trump Justice Department. Fill us in.
Speaking of courts and speaking of the federal judiciary, CBS News has confirmed an approximately $5 million settlement has been agreed to by the Justice Department with the estate of Ashli Babbitt. You'll recall Ashli Babbitt was at the forefront of the rioters on January 6th, right outside the House Speaker's lobby, which means she was kind of at the high water mark of the rioters in that very sensitive space at that very sensitive moment when the window was smashed.
And trying to climb in.
The police shot and killed Ashli Babbitt. One lieutenant for the U.S. Capitol Police did. An internal review found it was a justified shooting, according to the federal investigators who looked at the shooting. But this settlement means $5 million will be handed over to the estate of Ashli Babbitt, which is quite a striking thing, and some of the January 6th police victims say it is absolutely unconscionable.
Does anything with that settlement, other than the monetary value you just mentioned, indicate an admission of fault by the government?
We're going to find that out when the settlement papers are filed with the federal court, if they're public, if they're not made confidential. It's quite possible that part of the negotiations is what kind of statement you make. A lot of settlements in legal cases hinge not just on the dollar amount, but what you say when you hand over or don't hand over the money. There was a status report due in that federal civil case today, but this settlement will likely take weeks, if not months, to hash out.
Thank you for that update, Scott. I really appreciate that. Talk to me about what this data tells us about threats, how they're happening, who's being impacted most directly by them.
The federal judiciary is concerned about this, and judges who rarely speak out of turn, who rarely speak off the bench, are saying this. The Chief Justice of the United States put this in his year-end report, and we've spoken with a number of judges, including federal judge Esther Salas of New Jersey, whose son was murdered by a disgruntled person at their doorstep in 2020, who says this is becoming a systemic thing throughout the system, where it's not just a judge in this hot-button case, not just a judge in this courthouse where there's extra attention. It's becoming a universal issue, which raises two particularly troubling possibilities, Major. That violence is, again, going to strike a judge at some point, feels inevitable to some people, hopefully preventable. But secondly, that there can be a chilling effect to this, that judges may be less inclined to handle a certain thing a certain way if the chilling effect grows worse. There's a concern this could end up impacting the judiciary, which is difficult to measure, but it's a fear.
And it's impeachment, calls for impeachment, which are a process, but also threats of violence. And they're in two different buckets, yes?
Yeah, both have the potential to chill judges,
yes,
which is why there's a concern, in different ways. Threats of impeachment, which don't go anywhere in this particular Congress. Short of a high crime of a federal judge, this Congress couldn't impeach a ham sandwich on Main Street. But that said, the threat of impeachment does have a political motive, and it does have an impact. Threats of violence.
Especially if it's amplified, as it sometimes is, by significant actors in the political arena, President of the United States, on down. Yeah, threats of violence are in a different category entirely.
Far more corrosive, different category, and something we've seen play out, where in the January 6 cases, each judge in the federal bench circuit of Washington, D.C., had some number of threats against them. The judge who handled Trump's January 6 case here in Washington needed U.S. Marshal security, amplified security because of the threats. And this is something that there's a fear metastasizes versus gets back to normal.
And when I was a young reporter, there was a time when I was a young reporter. I covered police news in several jurisdictions in our country. And you would sometimes come across a case where someone who had a grievance with a judge over something that they thought was unjust to them might issue a threat, might do something violent. But this is political. This is spreading across things and amplified on social media in a very political context.
That's what was so striking about the report we opened this segment with. Those numbers show an order of magnitude change. Yes, judges who handle crimes are accustomed to getting some threats from criminals. This is something more pernicious.
Scott MacFarlane, always a pleasure, sir. Thank you.